The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Ethermore Palace as Captain Marcus Thornfield adjusted his ceremonial sword one final time. 23 years of faithful service had taught him that protocol was everything in the royal court. Every bow, every salute, every moment of silence held centuries of tradition behind it. Today, however, would test everything he believed about duty and honor. The great hall buzzed with nervous energy as courtiers prepared for the arrival of Princess Isabel Ravencrest, who had recently married into the royal family. Born in the neighboring kingdom of Valdris, she brought with her customs that many in Ethermore found strange and unsettling. Her marriage to Prince Edmund had been arranged to strengthen the alliance between the two kingdoms, but cultural differences had already created tension within the palace walls. Marcus stood at attention beside the throne room doors, his steel-gray eyes scanning the assembled nobles. Lord Chancellor Aldrich Whitmore, a man whose family had served the crown for generations, whispered urgently with several court advisers. Their faces showed concern, though Marcus could not hear their words from his position. The air felt heavy with unspoken worry. "Captain Thornfield," called a voice from across the hall. Marcus turned to see Sir Geoffrey Blackwood, the master of ceremonies, approaching with quick, nervous steps. His usually perfect posture seemed slightly bent under some invisible weight. "Sir Geoffrey," Marcus replied, offering a respectful nod. "Is everything prepared for the princess's arrival?" Geoffrey's eyes darted around the hall before he stepped closer, lowering his voice. "There have been developments, Captain. The princess has made certain requests regarding today's ceremony, requests that some find troubling." Before Marcus could ask for details, the great doors swung open with a resonating boom. A herald stepped forward, his voice echoing through the vast space. "Her Royal Highness, Princess Isabel Ravencrest of Ethermore." The assembled court turned as one toward the entrance. Princess Isabel swept into the hall with regal grace, her emerald silk gown flowing behind her like water. Her dark hair was arranged in an elaborate style, adorned with jewels that caught the morning light. She was undeniably beautiful, with sharp intelligence gleaming in her green eyes. But there was something else there, too, a determination that made Marcus instinctively straighten his shoulders. Behind her walked her personal retinue, including several advisers from Valdris and her lady-in-waiting, Elena Corvus, a stern-faced woman who seemed to catalog everything she saw. The foreign delegation moved with practiced precision, but their customs were clearly different from Ethermore traditions. Prince Edmund followed his wife, his usually cheerful demeanor subdued. Marcus had known the prince since childhood and could read the subtle signs of stress in his bearing. The young royal's hands were clasped too tightly behind his back, and his smile, while present, did not reach his eyes. As the royal procession moved through the hall, Marcus noticed how the Valdris customs differed from their own. The princess's guards walked with their weapons visible, while Ethermore protocol demanded ceremonial arms be sheathed in the presence of royalty. Her advisers wore darker colors than the bright court dress preferred in their kingdom. Small differences, perhaps, but in royal circles, such details mattered greatly. The procession reached the center of the hall, where a raised platform had been prepared. This was to be Princess Isabel's first formal address to the Ethermore court as a member of the royal family. Tradition dictated specific protocols for such occasions, protocols that Marcus knew by heart. Lord Chancellor Whitmore stepped forward, his ceremonial staff clicking against the marble floor 3 times, the traditional signal for the court to prepare for royal address. The assembled nobles arranged themselves according to rank and family lineage, a dance of precedence that had been performed for centuries. But then something unprecedented happened. Princess Isabel raised her hand, and her voice carried clearly across the hall. "Before I address this court, I wish to establish proper respect according to the customs of my birth kingdom." A murmur ran through the assembled nobles like wind through wheat. Marcus felt his chest tighten as he recognized the tone in her voice. This was not a request, but a command. In 23 years of service, he had never heard a member of the royal family challenge established protocol so directly. Elena Corvus stepped forward, her voice formal and carrying. In the kingdom of Valdris, it is customary for all those present to kneel before royal address as a sign of absolute respect and submission to the crown. Her Royal Highness requests that this tradition be observed here today. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus felt every eye in the hall turn toward the royal guard contingent. In Ethermoor, guards stood at attention during royal ceremonies. They never knelt unless specifically commanded by the reigning monarch, and even then, only during the most solemn occasions. To kneel would be to abandon centuries of tradition that marked the guard as protectors, not subjects. Lord Chancellor Whitmore's face had gone pale. "Your Highness," he began carefully, "while we respect the customs of Valdris, the protocols of Ethermoor have been established for—" "I am now a princess of Ethermoor," Isabel interrupted, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. "As such, I have the authority to request proper respect from those who serve this crown. I expect compliance." Marcus felt his jaw clench involuntarily. Around him, his fellow guards shifted uncomfortably. Lieutenant Samuel Hayes, standing 2 positions to his left, caught his eye with a questioning look. The younger guard clearly sought guidance from his captain, but Marcus himself was grappling with an impossible situation. The court nobles began to exchange glances, some looking toward Prince Edmund for guidance. But the prince remained silent, his face a careful mask that revealed nothing of his thoughts. Marcus realized with growing unease that no help would come from that quarter. "Captain Thornfield," Princess Isabel's voice rang out, and Marcus felt his blood run cold. She had singled him out, the most senior guard present. All eyes turned to him as she continued. "As captain of the Royal Guard, I expect you to set the proper example for your men." Marcus stepped forward, his boots clicking sharply on the marble. Years of training kept his movements precise and controlled, even as his mind raced through the implications of this moment. To kneel would be to break with tradition and potentially set a precedent that could forever change the role of the Royal Guard. To refuse would be to directly defy a member of the royal family in front of the entire court. "Your Highness," he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his chest, "the Royal Guard of Ethermoor has served the crown for over 4 centuries. In all that time, we have stood as protectors and guardians, ready to defend the royal family with our lives. Our position at attention during ceremonies represents our readiness to act in defense of the crown at a moment's notice." A flicker of something, surprise perhaps, or anger, passed across Princess Isabel's face. "Are you refusing my direct command, Captain?" The question hung in the air like a sword suspended by a thread. Marcus was aware of the dozens of people watching, waiting for his response. He could feel the weight of history pressing down on him, the expectations of all those who had worn the guard uniform before him. "I am explaining the traditions that have served this kingdom well, Your Highness," he replied carefully. "The Royal Guard's duty is to protect and serve, which we do best when able to respond immediately to any threat." Elena Corvus whispered something urgently in Princess Isabel's ear, but the princess waved her away with an impatient gesture. Her green eyes fixed on Marcus with an intensity that would have made a lesser man step back. "In Valdris," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the hall, "guards who fail to show proper respect face immediate dismissal from service. Captain, I will ask you one final time. Will you and your men kneel to show appropriate respect to the royal family?" Marcus felt time slow around him. He could hear his own heartbeat, could sense the tension radiating from every person in the hall. His fellow guards waited for his decision, knowing that whatever he chose would affect them all. The nobles held their breath, understanding that this moment would be talked about for years to come. In that suspended moment, Marcus thought of his father, who had served as a royal guard before him. He remembered the oath he had taken 23 years ago, swearing to uphold the traditions and honor of his position. He thought of the young guards under his command, who looked to him for guidance and leadership. Slowly, deliberately, Marcus drew himself to his full height. His voice, when he spoke, carried the weight of centuries of tradition. "Your Highness, I have served this crown faithfully for over 2 decades. I have sworn an oath to protect the royal family and uphold the traditions of this kingdom. The Royal Guard of Ethermoor stands at attention during ceremonies because we stand ready to defend. This is our tradition, our honor, and our duty." The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity. Princess Isabel's face had gone very still, her eyes never leaving Marcus's face. He could see the calculation in her gaze, the weighing of options and consequences. Then, without warning, she turned away from him and addressed the assembled court. "It seems that some in this kingdom value tradition over respect for the royal family. This is instructive." With that, she moved to the center of the platform and began her formal address as if nothing had happened. But Marcus knew that everything had changed. The line had been drawn, and he had chosen his side. The consequences of this moment would ripple through the palace like stones thrown into still water. As Princess Isabel spoke about unity between kingdoms and shared prosperity, Marcus remained at attention, his eyes scanning the hall for any sign of threat. But the greatest danger, he was beginning to realize, might not come from outside the palace walls. It might come from within, from the clash between old traditions and new demands, between duty and authority. The ceremony continued, but Marcus barely heard the words. His mind was already racing ahead, considering what this confrontation might mean for himself, for his guards, and for the kingdom itself. He had made his choice based on principle and tradition, but he understood that choices always carried consequences. When the ceremony finally ended and the court began to disperse, Marcus caught sight of Lord Chancellor Whitmore's concerned expression. Several noble families clustered together, speaking in hushed tones that suggested urgent discussion. Prince Edmund approached his wife with what appeared to be a strained smile, but Marcus noticed that the prince's hands remained clenched at his sides. As the royal party prepared to leave the hall, Princess Isabel paused near Marcus's position. For a moment, their eyes met across the space that separated them. In her gaze, he saw not anger, but something far more dangerous, a promise that this matter was far from concluded. "Captain Thornfield," she said quietly, her voice just loud enough for him to hear, "we shall speak again soon." Then she was gone, sweeping from the hall with her retinue following. But her words echoed in Marcus's mind like a warning bell. He had stood firm in defense of tradition, but he understood now that the real battle was just beginning. The great hall slowly emptied, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts and the weight of what he had done. Outside the tall windows, storm clouds were gathering on the horizon, casting shadows across the palace grounds. It seemed fitting, somehow, that the weather matched the mood that had settled over the court. As he finally turned to leave his post, Marcus wondered if he had made the right choice. Time would tell whether standing firm for tradition would prove to be an act of honor or the first step toward disaster. But one thing was certain: the old ways were under attack, and those who believed in them would have to fight to preserve what they held dear. 3 days after the confrontation in the Great Hall, Captain Marcus Thornfield found himself standing outside the council chamber, waiting for what he suspected would be the most difficult meeting of his career. The ornate doors, carved with the royal crest of Ethermoor, seemed heavier than usual as he contemplated what lay beyond them. Word of the incident had spread through the palace like wildfire. Servants whispered in corridors, nobles debated in their private chambers, and the foreign delegation from Valdres maintained an ominous silence that spoke louder than any protest. Marcus had felt the weight of countless stares over the past 3 days, some supportive, others clearly disapproving. The doors opened, and Sir Geoffrey Blackwood emerged, his usually composed face showing signs of strain. "Captain," he said quietly, "they're ready for you." Marcus entered the chamber to find an assembled group that immediately told him how seriously this matter was being treated. Lord Chancellor Aldrich Whitmore sat at the head of the polished oak table, his ceremonial staff resting against his chair. To his right sat Prince Edmund, who avoided Marcus's eyes and instead studied the papers before him with unusual intensity. Several other council members were present, including Lord Commander Sebastian Ravencroft, the kingdom's highest military authority. But it was the presence of Princess Isabel that dominated the room. She sat opposite the prince, her posture perfect, and her emerald dress chosen, Marcus suspected, to remind everyone of her royal status. Beside her sat Elena Corvus, whose stern expression suggested she was there as more than just a lady-in-waiting. "Captain Thornfield," Lord Chancellor Whitmore began, his voice formal and measured, "you have been called before this council to discuss the events that occurred during Princess Isabel's formal address 3 days ago." Marcus stepped forward and offered the required bow to the assembled royalty and council members. "I am at your service, Lord Chancellor." "The princess has raised concerns about insubordination within the royal guard," Whitmore continued, "specifically your failure to comply with a direct royal command during a formal ceremony." Princess Isabel leaned forward slightly, her green eyes fixed on Marcus. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority she had clearly been cultivating since her arrival. "Captain, in the 3 days since our encounter, I have been studying the laws and protocols of Ethermore. I have discovered that royal commands during formal ceremonies carry the full weight of crown authority. Your refusal to kneel constituted a direct violation of royal decree." Marcus felt his jaw tighten, but he kept his voice steady. "Your Highness, with respect, I acted in accordance with centuries-old traditions that govern the conduct of the royal guard. These traditions exist to ensure the effective protection of the royal family." Elena Corvus opened a leather folder and withdrew several documents. "Captain, we have here the protocols from the Kingdom of Valdres, where proper respect for royalty is clearly defined. We also have examples from 3 other allied kingdoms where guard units routinely kneel during royal ceremonies without any compromise to their protective duties." Lord Commander Ravencroft, who had remained silent until now, cleared his throat. His voice, when he spoke, carried the authority of decades of military service. "With permission to speak freely, Your Highness, the Royal Guard of Ethermore has operated under established protocols for over 4 centuries. These protocols were developed through experience and have proven effective in protecting the crown through numerous threats and challenges." Princess Isabel's expression sharpened. "Lord Commander, are you suggesting that the customs of other kingdoms, including my birth kingdom of Valdres, are somehow inferior to those of Ethermore?" The question was clearly a trap, and Ravencroft recognized it as such. "Not at all, Your Highness. I am simply stating that each kingdom's protocols are developed to suit their specific needs and circumstances." "Then surely," Princess Isabel continued smoothly, "the protocols of Ethermore can be adapted to show proper respect when required, without compromising their effectiveness." Prince Edmund finally looked up from his papers, and Marcus was surprised to see genuine conflict in the young royal's face. "Perhaps," the prince said carefully, "we might find a compromise that honors both the traditions of Ethermore and the customs that Princess Isabel brings from Valdres." "What sort of compromise did you have in mind, Your Highness?" Lord Chancellor Whitmore asked. Before Prince Edmund could respond, Princess Isabel spoke. "I propose that the royal guard adopt a modified protocol. During formal ceremonies where I am present, guards will kneel at the beginning of royal address and rise to attention during the actual speech. This shows proper respect while maintaining their protective readiness." Marcus felt his heart sink. The proposal sounded reasonable on the surface, but he understood the deeper implications. To change centuries of protocol for one member of the royal family would set a precedent that could fundamentally alter the nature of the guard's role. "Your Highness," he said, choosing his words carefully, "such a change would require modification of the guard's sacred oath. The traditions we follow are not merely ceremonial. They are bound to our very identity as protectors of the crown." Princess Isabel's eyes flashed with something that might have been anger or calculation. "Captain, are you suggesting that adapting to new circumstances is somehow incompatible with your duties?" Marcus realized he was being led into another trap. Any answer that seemed to reject adaptation would paint him as inflexible and resistant to royal authority. Yet agreeing to the changes would betray everything he had sworn to uphold. "I am saying, Your Highness, that changes to fundamental protocols should be considered carefully and implemented, if at all, with the agreement of all members of the royal family and full understanding of the consequences." Lord Chancellor Whitmore nodded thoughtfully. "Captain Thornfield raises a valid point. Such changes would indeed require careful consideration and proper authorization." But Princess Isabel was not finished. "Lord Chancellor, I have been conducting my own investigation into Captain Thornfield's background and service record." She gestured to Elena Corvus, who opened another folder. "We have discovered some interesting information about the captain's past, including several instances where he may have exceeded his authority." Marcus felt a cold chill run down his spine. He had always prided himself on his exemplary service record, and he could not imagine what they might have found. Elena Corvus began to read from her documents. 7 years ago, Captain Thornfield ordered the detention of Lord Harrison Blackthorne for 3 hours without royal authorization. 4 years ago, he modified guard patrol routes without consulting superior officers. 2 years ago, he provided information to foreign dignitaries that had not been approved for release. Each accusation hit Marcus like a physical blow, not because they were entirely false, but because they were taken completely out of context. Lord Harrison had been detained because Marcus had suspected him of treason, suspicions that had later proven correct. The patrol routes had been modified to respond to a specific security threat. The information shared with dignitaries had been standard diplomatic courtesy that posed no security risk. But presented without context, these actions painted a picture of a guard captain who regularly exceeded his authority and made unilateral decisions. Lord Commander Ravencroft leaned forward, his expression skeptical. "Princess Isabel, these incidents all had valid justifications at the time they occurred. Captain Thornfield's actions in each case were later vindicated by events." "Perhaps," Princess Isabel replied smoothly, "but they establish a pattern of behavior. A pattern of a man who believes he knows better than royal authority and acts accordingly." The accusation hung in the air like a sword. Marcus realized with growing alarm that this was not merely about kneeling during ceremonies. This was a systematic attempt to undermine his authority and, by extension, the independence of the royal guard itself. Prince Edmund shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Isabel, Captain Thornfield has served my family faithfully for over 2 decades. His loyalty has never been in question." "Loyalty and obedience are not the same thing, my dear husband," Princess Isabel replied, her tone suggesting that she had thought this through very carefully. "A guard who picks and chooses which commands to follow, regardless of his intentions, poses a potential threat to royal authority." Marcus felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He could see where this was leading, and he understood that his next words might determine not only his own fate, but the future of the Royal Guard as an independent institution. "Your Highness," he said, addressing Prince Edmund directly, "I have served your family since you were a boy. I have protected you, your father, and now your wife with my life. Every decision I have made has been guided by my oath to protect the crown and preserve the stability of this kingdom." Prince Edmund's expression showed genuine conflict. Marcus could see the young royal struggling between loyalty to his captain and the pressure from his new wife. "Captain," the prince said slowly, "no one questions your dedication or your service. But Princess Isabel raises concerns about the need for clear chains of command and consistent obedience to royal authority." Before Marcus could respond, the chamber doors opened unexpectedly. A herald entered and bowed deeply. "Your Highnesses, Lords and Ladies of the Council, His Majesty King Wilhelm requests immediate audience with this assembly." A stunned silence fell over the room. King Wilhelm rarely involved himself directly in council matters, preferring to let his advisors handle most administrative issues. His sudden arrival could only mean that news of this conflict had reached the highest levels of the kingdom. The king entered with the measured pace of a man who had ruled for 30 years. His graying beard was perfectly groomed, and his blue eyes held the wisdom and wariness that came with decades of political survival. Behind him walked his personal aide and 2 guards from his own elite unit. Everyone in the room rose and bowed as protocol demanded. King Wilhelm acknowledged the respect with a nod and took his place at the head of the table, automatically shifting the entire dynamic of the meeting. "Please, be seated," the king said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of absolute power. "I have been informed of the discussions taking place regarding royal protocol and guard duties." His eyes found Marcus, and the captain felt the full weight of royal attention. "Captain Thornfield, approach." Marcus stepped forward and bowed again. "Your Majesty." "Captain, you have served this crown faithfully for 23 years. In that time, you have faced assassins, foreign threats, and internal conspiracies. You have never once failed in your duties. Is this assessment correct?" "Your Majesty honors me with his confidence," Marcus replied. King Wilhelm nodded slowly, then turned his attention to Princess Isabel. "My daughter-in-law, you come to us from Valdris with your own customs and traditions. This is natural and expected. However, the integration of new customs with established traditions is a delicate process that requires wisdom and patience." Princess Isabel's composure remained perfect, but Marcus detected a slight tension in her shoulders. "Your Majesty, I seek only to ensure proper respect for royal authority while building bridges between our kingdoms." "A worthy goal," the king acknowledged. "However, the Royal Guard of Ethermore is more than a ceremonial unit. They are the final line of defense for this crown. Their traditions have been forged through centuries of real threats and actual combat. Changes to their protocols cannot be made lightly or without full consideration of the consequences." The king's words hung in the air like a royal decree. Marcus felt a surge of relief, but he was careful not to let it show on his face. But Princess Isabel was far from finished. "Your Majesty, with respect, the integration of our kingdoms requires adaptation from all parties. If the Guard cannot show appropriate respect to all members of the royal family equally, it raises questions about their loyalty to the unified crown." King Wilhelm's expression became very still. Marcus recognized the look. It was the face the king wore when he was considering matters of great importance. "Princess," the king said finally, "are you suggesting that Captain Thornfield's loyalty to this crown is in question?" The question was a challenge, and everyone in the room knew it. To answer yes would be to make a direct accusation against a decorated soldier in the presence of the king himself. To answer no would undermine her entire argument. Princess Isabel took a breath before responding. Your Majesty, I suggest only that loyalty must be demonstrated through obedience to royal commands, regardless of personal preferences or traditional practices. The king nodded thoughtfully. I see. Captain Thornfield, do you have anything to add? Marcus felt every eye in the room upon him. This was his moment to speak not just for himself, but for the institution he had served his entire adult life. Your Majesty, he said, his voice steady and clear, I have sworn an oath to protect and serve this crown. That oath guides every decision I make and every action I take. The traditions of the Royal Guard are not obstacles to service. They are the foundation that makes effective service possible. He paused, then continued. If following those traditions means I must sometimes explain their importance, rather than blindly following commands that would undermine them, then I believe that too is part of my duty to the crown. The silence that followed seemed to last forever. King Wilhelm's expression revealed nothing of his thoughts, and Marcus wondered if he had just ended his career with those words. Finally, the king spoke. This matter requires further consideration. I will review the protocols in question and consult with appropriate advisors. Until that time, current guard procedures will remain in effect. It was not a complete victory for either side, but Marcus understood that it was likely the best outcome he could have hoped for. The immediate crisis had been postponed, but the underlying conflict remained unresolved. As the meeting concluded and the various participants began to file out, Princess Isabel approached Marcus one final time. Captain, she said quietly, you fight well for lost causes, but time and change are more powerful than tradition. Remember that. With those words, she left the chamber, followed by her retinue. Marcus remained behind, understanding that the battle for the soul of the Royal Guard was far from over. The princess had revealed herself to be a formidable opponent, one who combined political skill with patient determination. The next phase of this conflict would require all of his experience and wisdom to navigate successfully. 2 weeks had passed since King Wilhelm's intervention, and the palace had settled into an uneasy quiet. Captain Marcus Thornfield had spent those days in careful observation, noting how the conflict had affected everyone within the court. The servants moved with nervous energy. Noble families whispered among themselves with increased frequency. And even the normally cheerful Prince Edmund seemed weighted down by unspoken concerns. Marcus stood in the guard training courtyard, watching his men run through their daily exercises. The familiar sounds of sword practice and shouted commands provided some comfort in these uncertain times. Lieutenant Samuel Hayes approached, his young face showing the strain of recent events. Captain, Samuel said quietly, there are rumors spreading among the staff. They say Princess Isabel has been meeting privately with representatives from other kingdoms, discussing guard protocols and royal security. Marcus nodded grimly. He had heard similar reports from his network of contacts throughout the palace. What else have you heard, Lieutenant? Some of the newer guards are starting to question whether we should simply accept the princess's demands. They worry that continued resistance might cost us our positions entirely. This was exactly what Marcus had feared. Division within the guard ranks would weaken them far more effectively than any external pressure. He had spent 23 years building the unit into a cohesive force, and he could see that unity beginning to fracture. Gather the men in the main hall after evening duties, Marcus instructed. It's time we address these concerns directly. As Samuel departed to carry out his orders, Marcus caught sight of an unexpected figure approaching across the courtyard. Princess Isabel walked alone, without her usual retinue of advisors and guards. She wore a simple blue dress, rather than her formal court attire, and her manner seemed less imperious than it had during their previous encounters. "Captain Thornfield," she called as she drew near. "Might I have a word with you privately?" Marcus felt his guard instincts heighten immediately. Every previous interaction with the princess had been in formal settings with witnesses present. This unusual approach suggested either a trap or a significant change in her strategy. "Of course, Your Highness," he replied with appropriate formality. "Perhaps my office would provide suitable privacy." They walked in silence through the corridors that led to the guard quarters. Marcus's office was a modest space filled with reports, duty rosters, and maps of the palace grounds. He offered Princess Isabel the room's single comfortable chair while he remained standing. "Thank you for agreeing to speak with me privately," she began, her tone notably different from the commanding voice she had used in their previous encounters. "I believe we may have gotten off to a poor start." Marcus studied her face carefully, searching for signs of deception or manipulation. What he saw instead was something unexpected, what appeared to be genuine uncertainty and perhaps even regret. "Your Highness," he replied cautiously, "I have always sought to serve the royal family to the best of my abilities." Princess Isabel nodded slowly. "I know that, Captain. Over the past 2 weeks, I have spoken with many people about you. Servants who have worked alongside you for years, nobles who have observed your service, even some of the guards under your command." She paused as if gathering her thoughts. "What I have learned has given me much to consider." Marcus remained silent, sensing that this was a moment to listen rather than speak. "In Valdres," she continued, "the royal guards are different from yours. They are selected primarily for their loyalty to the crown and their willingness to follow orders without question. They kneel because kneeling represents submission to authority." Her green eyes met his directly. "But I have come to understand that the guards of Ethermore are not selected merely for loyalty. They are chosen for their ability to think, to assess threats, and to make decisions that protect the crown even when those decisions might be uncomfortable or unpopular." Marcus felt his surprise growing. This was not the conversation he had expected. "Your Highness," he said carefully, "the traditions of our guard have evolved over centuries of actual service. They are not mere ceremony, but practical wisdom earned through experience." "Yes," Princess Isabel agreed. "I am beginning to understand that. Tell me, Captain, during your years of service, have there been times when following direct orders would have endangered the royal family?" Marcus hesitated. The question touched on sensitive matters of palace security and royal protection, but something in her manner suggested genuine interest rather than an attempt to gather ammunition for future accusations. "There have been occasions," he admitted, "when immediate circumstances required quick decisions that had not been anticipated by previous orders. A guard who cannot think and adapt is of limited value in protecting the crown." Princess Isabel leaned forward slightly. "Can you give me an example?" Marcus considered for a moment, then decided on a story that was both illustrative and not too sensitive to share. "5 years ago," he began, "Prince Edmund was scheduled to attend a public ceremony in the market square. The plan called for minimal security because it was intended to be an informal, friendly interaction with the common people. But when we arrived, I noticed several individuals in the crowd whose behavior seemed suspicious. He could see that he had Princess Isabel's full attention now. Protocol called for the prince to proceed as planned. The ceremony was important for maintaining good relations with the merchants and common folk. But my instincts told me something was wrong." "What did you do?" "I made a decision to alter our security formation without consulting anyone. I moved additional guards into the crowd and positioned them to respond quickly if needed. Some people, including several court officials, were unhappy with the changes." Princess Isabel's expression had grown thoughtful. "Were your suspicions correct?" 3 of the suspicious individuals were found to be carrying concealed weapons. They were planning to create a disturbance that could have injured or killed the prince. My unauthorized changes to the security plan allowed us to identify and neutralize the threat before anyone was harmed. A long silence followed as Princess Isabel absorbed this information. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet and reflective. In Valdres, a guard who made such unauthorized changes would have been severely punished, regardless of the outcome. And that, Marcus replied gently, is why our traditions matter. They allow us to be protectors, rather than merely ornaments. Princess Isabel sat back in her chair, and Marcus could see her reassessing everything that had happened between them. "Captain," she said finally, "I owe you an apology. I came to Ethermore believing that respect for authority meant absolute obedience to commands. I failed to understand that true service sometimes requires the wisdom to know when commands should be questioned." Marcus felt his tension beginning to ease for the first time in weeks. "Your Highness, you bring your own wisdom and experience from Valdres. Perhaps the challenge is finding ways to blend the best of both our traditions." "Perhaps," she agreed. "But tell me honestly, do you believe there is any room for compromise in this matter?" Marcus had been thinking about this question for days. "Your Highness, I believe that mutual respect is indeed important. If there were ways to demonstrate that respect without compromising our protective effectiveness, I would be open to considering them." Princess Isabel's face brightened slightly. "What might such compromises look like?" "Perhaps," Marcus suggested carefully, "during formal ceremonies, the guard could offer a deeper bow at the beginning of royal address, not kneeling, but a clear gesture of respect. And perhaps we might develop new protocols that honor both Ethermore traditions and the customs you bring from Valdres." "That sounds reasonable," she replied. "But such changes would need to be developed thoughtfully, with input from experienced guards and court officials." "Agreed," Marcus said. "Major changes to security protocols cannot be implemented hastily." Princess Isabel stood, smoothing her dress. "Captain, would you be willing to work with me to develop such compromises? I realize now that I approached this matter poorly, and I would value your expertise in finding solutions." Marcus felt a surge of relief and surprisingly respect for the young royal. It took courage to admit error and change course, particularly for someone in her position. "I would be honored to assist in any way that serves the crown, Your Highness." "Excellent," she said with what appeared to be genuine pleasure. "I will also need to make amends with your guards and the court officials. I fear I may have damaged important relationships in my zeal to establish authority." "Your Highness," Marcus said, "the fact that you recognize this shows wisdom beyond your years. The court and the guards will respect honest acknowledgement of mistakes." As they prepared to leave his office, Princess Isabel paused at the door. "Captain, may I ask you something personal?" "Of course, Your Highness." "Why did you risk your career to defend these traditions? You could have simply followed my commands and avoided all this conflict." Marcus considered the question seriously. "Your Highness, 23 years ago I swore an oath to protect the crown. But that oath meant more than just following orders. It meant preserving the institutions and traditions that keep the kingdom strong. Sometimes protecting those institutions requires standing up to those who would change them without understanding them. Even when that person is a member of the royal family?" "Especially then," Marcus replied quietly. "The crown is served by advisors who tell it what it wants to hear, but it is protected by those who tell it what it needs to know." Princess Isabel smiled, and for the first time since her arrival it seemed genuinely warm. "I am beginning to understand why King Wilhelm values your service so highly." That evening, Marcus gathered his guards in the main hall as planned. But instead of the tense meeting he had anticipated, he found himself able to share unexpected news. "Men," he began, addressing the assembled guards, "I have had a productive conversation with Princess Isabel. We have agreed to work together to develop protocols that honor both our traditions and the need for appropriate respect." A murmur of relief ran through the assembled guards. Lieutenant Hayes stepped forward. "Captain, does this mean the crisis is over?" "It means," Marcus replied carefully, "that we have the opportunity to be part of the solution rather than simply resisting change. But this will require all of us to approach the matter with open minds and professional conduct." Over the following days, Marcus worked closely with Princess Isabel, Elena Corvus, and several court officials to develop new protocols. The process was sometimes difficult, as deeply held beliefs and practices were examined and debated. But gradually, a framework emerged that satisfied the major concerns of all parties. The new protocols included enhanced bowing procedures during formal ceremonies, with guards offering deep, respectful bows at the beginning of royal addresses while maintaining their traditional standing positions during the actual ceremonies. Additional gestures of respect were incorporated for special occasions, while preserving the guards' operational flexibility and protective effectiveness. Perhaps more importantly, Princess Isabel took steps to repair relationships damaged during the initial conflict. She met privately with Lord Chancellor Whitmore to express regret for the confrontational approach she had taken. She visited the guard quarters to personally thank the guards for their service and apologize for questioning their loyalty. The turning point came 3 weeks after their private conversation, during a state dinner for visiting dignitaries from the neighboring kingdom of Thornwick. As the evening's formal presentations began, Princess Isabel stood to address the assembled guests. Before beginning her speech, she paused and looked directly at Captain Thornfield, who stood at his traditional post near the main entrance. With clear deliberation, she offered him a respectful nod of acknowledgement. "Distinguished guests," she began, "before I offer greetings from the royal family of Ethermore, I wish to acknowledge those who make gatherings like this possible through their dedicated service. Our royal guard stands ready to protect us all, guided by centuries of tradition and unwavering commitment to duty." The guests applauded politely, but Marcus understood the deeper significance of her words. She was publicly acknowledging the value of the guard's traditions and their importance to the kingdom's security. When the dinner concluded and the guests had departed, Princess Isabel approached Marcus one final time. "Captain," she said quietly, "I wanted to thank you for your patience during these past weeks. You taught me important lessons about leadership and about the difference between authority and wisdom." "Your Highness," Marcus replied, "you demonstrated courage in reconsidering your position and working toward compromise. That is the mark of a true leader." "I hope," she said with a slight smile, "that our kingdoms will both be stronger for having learned from each other." As Princess Isabel departed with her retinue, Marcus reflected on the strange journey they had all traveled. What had begun as a confrontation over protocol had evolved into something far more significant, a lesson in the importance of understanding before judging, of seeking wisdom before demanding obedience. The traditions of the royal guard remained intact, but they had been enriched rather than weakened by the encounter. New elements had been woven into the fabric of court protocol, creating something that honored both the old ways and the new perspectives brought by the union of kingdoms. Standing in the quiet palace hall as the evening settled around him, Marcus felt a deep sense of satisfaction. He had stood firm for principle when it mattered most, but he had also learned the value of flexibility and compromise when they served the greater good. The kingdom was stronger now, not because conflict had been avoided, but because it had been met with wisdom and resolved through understanding. The royal guard would continue to stand watch over the crown, their traditions preserved and their purpose renewed for whatever challenges lay ahead. In the distance, he could hear the changing of the guard as the night shift took their positions. The ancient ritual continued as it had for centuries, unchanged in its essential nature, but enriched by the knowledge that some traditions are strong enough to adapt without breaking, and wise enough to grow without losing their soul.